What if the exhaustion you feel is not coming from life itself, but from spending years trying to become someone more worthy of being loved? Imagine this. You are sitting alone in a quiet room. No crisis, no dramatic breakthrough, no mystical vision, just an ordinary evening. A cup of coffee slowly losing its warmth beside you. The soft sound of a fan turning somewhere in the background. The strange stillness of a moment that asks nothing from you. And suddenly, something feels different. Not elevated, not enlightened, just quiet. A kind of quiet that almost makes you uncomfortable, because for the first time in years, there is no inner emergency happening inside you. No urgent need to fix yourself. No desperate attempt to become more healed, more awakened, more aligned, more evolved. And instead of relief, a strange question begins to rise. What if I lost the fire? What if the intensity that used to consume me has finally disappeared? Here is what almost nobody tells you about spiritual awakening. People talk endlessly about the beginning, the breakdowns, the sleepless nights, the shadow work, the identity collapse, the painful realization that you can never fully return to who you used to be. Every teacher talks about how awakening starts. Very few people talk honestly about how it ends, because the end of awakening does not look dramatic. It does not look transcendent. It does not make you appear special. If anything, it makes you look astonishingly ordinary. That is the part nobody expects. Carl Jung once wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Not partially, not spiritually, not aesthetically, completely. And most people never realize how frightening that truly is. Because accepting yourself completely means there is nowhere left to run, no new identity to hide inside, no self-improvement project to distract yourself with, no spiritual performance to maintain, only you, raw, human, unfinished, and somehow still enough. The completion of awakening is not becoming superhuman. It is becoming deeply, honestly human, and there are signs this shift has begun. Signs so subtle that most people overlook them completely. The first sign changes the way you relate to conflict itself. You no longer need to be right. Think carefully about who you used to be before this journey began. Before the books, before the healing, before the endless analysis, before the language of consciousness entered your life. For most people, being right never had much to do with truth. It had to do with safety. If people agreed with you, you felt significant. If people validated your perspective, you felt real. If people listened to you, you felt visible. The ego builds entire emotional structures around this. Jung understood that deeply. The ego survives through identification. Identification with opinions. Identification with intelligence. Identification with morality. Identification with being correct. And what surprises many people is this. Spiritual awakening does not immediately dissolve the ego. It often makes the ego more sophisticated. The need to be right simply changes clothing. Suddenly you are no longer arguing about ordinary things. You are arguing about consciousness, energy, healing, trauma, masculine and feminine polarity, spiritual alignment. Who is awake? Who is unconscious? Who is evolved? Who is still trapped? The ego becomes spiritual, and because spiritual language sounds wise, the illusion becomes incredibly difficult to detect. A man spends hours online discussing awakening, correcting people, analyzing their wounds, explaining why others are operating from ego. He speaks fluently about shadow integration, inner child healing, consciousness, presence, and all the while, something deeper remains untouched. his need to feel superior, his fear of being insignificant, his terror of uncertainty. The awakening journey gave his ego a more beautiful mask. That is all. Jung called this identification with the spiritual persona. The ego does not disappear. It adapts. It becomes more intelligent, more philosophical, more socially acceptable. And then one day, something changes. Not dramatically, quietly. You find yourself sitting across from someone who completely disagrees with you. And for the first time, your nervous system remains calm. You listen, not strategically, not waiting for your turn to respond. Actually listen. You become curious. You no longer feel psychologically threatened by disagreement. Not because you became passive, not because you stopped caring, but because your identity is no longer trapped inside the argument. Your worth is no longer dependent on winning. That is a profound shift. A person who once needed constant validation slowly becomes quieter, less reactive, less defensive, more grounded. Not because they gave up, because something inside them finally settled. The second sign is even more painful. You begin losing the identity of someone who is healing. This stage is subtle, dangerously subtle, because many people build entire lives around their healing journey without realizing it. A woman spends years doing inner work. She journals every morning, meditates every evening, studies trauma, studies nervous system regulation, studies attachment styles. She becomes deeply committed to growth. Everyone around her admires her awareness, her discipline, her emotional intelligence. And then one morning, something strange happens. She wakes up, looks at her journal, and feels no desire to open it. Not resistance, not burnout, just absence. She sits quietly with her coffee, looks out the window, and realizes she no longer knows who she is without the healing process. That realization terrifies her, because for years, healing was not just something she practiced. It became her identity. Jung understood this deeply. People do not simply carry wounds. They organize themselves around them. The wound becomes structure. The struggle becomes meaning. The identity of being someone who is healing can become emotionally addictive, because it gives life direction, purpose, community, narrative, and secretly, many people are afraid of truly healing. Because if the wound disappears, who are they afterward? If the story ends, what remains? Who are you when you are no longer the seeker? Who are you when you stop introducing yourself through your pain? That emptiness feels frightening at first. But eventually something beautiful begins happening. The person slowly stops performing transformation. They stop documenting every emotional breakthrough. Stop turning every experience into psychological analysis. Stop narrating their growth in real time. And instead, they begin living. Simply living. Not because they became shallow, because they finally entered the life all the healing was pointing toward. The journals served their purpose. The practices served their purpose. The map was useful, but eventually the map must be put down. Otherwise, you spend your entire life studying directions without ever inhabiting the destination. The third sign is uncomfortable. You begin seeing the shadow side of spirituality itself. Eventually, you recognize something difficult. The spiritual path can become another form of avoidance, another identity, another performance, another place for the ego to hide. A man spends years studying Jung, meditating, listening to spiritual teachers, discussing archetypes and consciousness. People admire his insight, but privately, his relationships remain deeply unhealthy. He still manipulates. still becomes defensive when criticized, still needs control, still needs superiority. Only now, he explains those behaviors using spiritual vocabulary. His controlling nature becomes holding space. His emotional distance becomes protecting energy. His inability to accept criticism becomes maintaining boundaries. The shadow learned a more elegant language. That is all. Eventually, awakening matures enough that you begin seeing this clearly. Not with shame, not with self-hatred, but with honesty. You look back and realize how often spirituality became another method of avoiding ordinary responsibility. How often analysis replaced vulnerability. How often meditation replaced difficult conversations. How often spiritual language protected you from direct emotional truth. And strangely, this realization softens you. You become less self-righteous, less interested in appearing conscious, less invested in looking evolved. The fourth sign changes everything. You stop trying to become better, and paradoxically, that is when real transformation begins. Modern culture has turned self-improvement into a permanent emergency. There is always another habit, another breakthrough, another mindset, another level, another optimization, another version of yourself waiting somewhere ahead. Even spirituality became infected by this pressure. The language changed, but the anxiety remained the same. You are still not allowed to rest, still not allowed to feel complete, still not allowed to simply exist as you are. Jung understood that much of what people call self-improvement is actually self-rejection, wearing elegant clothing. The ego trying desperately to escape itself, because if you stop striving for one moment, a terrifying feeling appears. Maybe I am not enough. And staying present with that feeling without immediately trying to solve it is one of the hardest things a human being can do. A man spends 8 years dedicated to spiritual development. Meditation every morning. Rigid discipline, constant growth, constant productivity, constant learning. Everyone admires him, but secretly he feels exhausted, emotionally empty, disconnected from joy. Eventually, he realizes something shocking. The self he is trying to create is standing in the way of the self he already is. That realization changes everything, because real growth does not emerge from psychological violence. It emerges from acceptance, deep acceptance, not passive resignation, not giving up, real acceptance. The kind that says, I no longer need to hate myself into transformation. The fifth sign is beautiful. Silence begins feeling like home. Most people are terrified of silence, not because silence is empty, because silence reveals. When external noise disappears, unresolved emotions rise. Old grief, old fear, old memories, unfinished conversations, inner tension. Most people spend years drowning themselves in stimulation. Music, podcasts, scrolling, television, notifications, noise, constant noise, not because they enjoy it, because stillness forces them to encounter themselves. And early awakening often makes this worse. The more conscious you become, the louder the unresolved material sounds. But eventually something shifts. Silence stops feeling threatening. You stop needing constant distraction. You sit alone in a room. No music, no stimulation, no entertainment. And instead of anxiety, you feel rest. Real rest. Not because life became perfect, because you finally stopped running from yourself. The sixth sign is difficult for many spiritual seekers. You begin outgrowing your teachers, even the ones who transformed your life. This stage feels almost disloyal at first. Because spiritual seekers often develop emotional dependence on frameworks, on systems, on philosophies, on teachers, on intellectual structures that help them survive confusion. And there is nothing wrong with that. Guidance matters, teachers matter, books matter, but eventually the framework must loosen. Otherwise, the map becomes a prison. You stop needing someone else to constantly explain your inner world to you. You begin developing your own relationship with reality, your own way of seeing, your own way of understanding silence, pain, love, meaning, and strangely, this creates more humility, not less. Because the deeper you go, the more mystery you encounter. The seventh and final sign is the quietest of all. You stop searching for your true self, and finally, begin living. Think carefully about the entire spiritual journey. All the books, all the healing, all the seeking, all the nights spent trying to understand yourself. What was it all for? Most people answer the same way: to find myself, to discover who I truly am. But eventually, something extraordinary becomes clear. The self is not an object waiting to be discovered. It is not hidden somewhere inside you, like treasure buried underground. The self is something you become through living, through presence, through participation, through relationship, through experience, through honest contact with life. You stop waiting for some future version of yourself to finally arrive. You stop postponing your life until healing is complete. You stop treating existence like a waiting room, and instead, you begin inhabiting the life already here. This imperfect life, this unfinished life, this ordinary life. You begin eating slowly, listening more carefully, laughing more honestly, feeling emotions without immediately analyzing them, being present without trying to turn every moment into spiritual meaning. You become more available to life, more reachable, more human. And paradoxically, that is the closest thing to enlightenment most people will ever experience. Not transcendence, participation, not escape, presence, not superiority, reality. The completion of awakening is astonishingly quiet. No dramatic music, no glowing aura, no perfect wisdom, no final arrival. Only this: you stop standing outside your own life trying to analyze it. And finally, step inside. You survived things that should have broken you. You walked through confusion, loneliness, identity collapse, fear, grief, and slowly, without ceremony, something inside you softened. Not weakened, softened. The fire did not disappear. It settled. It settled. And a settled fire gives warmth more steadily than one still burning desperately to prove it exists. That is the final secret. Awakening was never meant to make you extraordinary. It was meant to return you to yourself. Not the performed self, not the optimized self, not the spiritual self, the real self, the breathing self, the ordinary self, the self capable of sitting quietly in a room at the end of the day and feeling no need to become anyone else. That is peace, not perfection, peace. And if you have begun feeling this shift inside your own life, then maybe the journey is not ending. Maybe for the first time, it is finally becoming real. Welcome back to yourself.